We are here once again in East Palestine. I'm excited to chat with both Tammy and Rick today. I've heard a lot about both of you. I know Rick's been instrumental in a lot of cases in getting folks actual prescriptions for the vinyl chloride tests. I've heard quite a bit about that. We can get into that at some point. But first off, I guess, your residence here in East Palestine, the very beginning of this, how did you all hear about how the derailment happened? Initial impressions of the whole thing? I mean, this is obviously a kind of hopefully a once-in-a-lifetime experience for anybody. This is a terrible tragedy that's gone on here. We hope that it doesn't happen anywhere else. So just hearing a lot of these firsthand accounts from folks like yourselves is so important for folks to try to understand a little bit about what you're going through.
You can talk about that. First of all, we both want to thank you for everything you've done. Tirelessly been here and talking to residents and people. So thank you, first of all.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I wish there was more that we could do, frankly, but I appreciate that, though. Yeah.
Well, we've been here for 27 years. We built this house, so it was just all woods, and we started from scratch. And the night of the derailments, we were just watching TV. We can hear the trains from here, but we did not hear the derailment itself. So it was when we were going to bed that hopped online and started to see a fire going on in town, and we was like, hey, the town's on fire. And that's how we found out about the train derailment. And then we started hearing some people talking online like, well, there's vinyl chloride on that train. So that was getting out in the middle of the night on Friday night, but there was no confirmation yet.
Right.
And then
it was kind of just through the grapevine, essentially.
Exactly.
No officials or anything were saying it was vinyl chloride, just kind of folks texting each other and that sort of thing online.
Correct.
Okay.
So the next day, he went to work in Darlington, and he said the smoke, the smell was really, really bad, and he told me to stay inside. I did go out to take the dogs out, but still, he did have someone come in that was at the derailment that night, a fireman, and said that, there's vinyl chloride on that train. But
So at that point, I just treat a lot of first responders just because they're patients already.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of them came in, and at that time there were kind of rumblings hey, there might be vinyl chloride or something on that train. And keep in mind, this is noon. I've limited hours on Saturday, so I'm about to close. So this is it's pretty long after the derailment. It happened at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Before, right?
So, and we're not told anything. And I said, hey, I heard maybe there's vinyl chloride, and the thing that shocked me said, hey, Doc, that's the least of the chemicals you have to worry about on that train. And so they knew there were other chemicals, and we were never told until
Sunday afternoon. I think there was a press conference. It might have been a little later in the day. They said they're going to evacuate, and that's when we said, we need to get out of here, because they were talking about the trains exploding, but we were very concerned at that point. Well, we don't know what we're breathing in.
Right.
So we did start to pack things up, but then that siren went off on the phone, and it was like immediate evacuation. And so we packed up pretty quickly and hightailed it out of here.
Right. And I mean, it's scary too. We're looking into all sorts of angles in this, as I'm sure everybody here is, including yourselves. It's scary to hear the firefighters saying vinyl chloride is the least of your concerns. I've got a lot of questions about what was on the train. I mean, there's discrepancies and all sorts of things. We're looking into a couple stories related to that. It's at this point there's been so much misinformation or misguided information being put out, unfortunately, by a lot of these government agencies, the EPA in particular, in a lot of cases, where and I'll ask you all about this, but just a couple days after the controlled burn in quotes, because nothing about that looked controlled to me. No. An expert I've been speaking with who is a former EPA official, decades on the job, he doesn't think that looks like a controlled burn. That should fall into an entirely different category, or like an open burn or something like that, which shouldn't be happening in this sort of situation. You've got all these agencies coming in and telling you, okay, yeah, it's safe to go home after just a couple days, when in reality, they didn't know. And they should have come out and said that they didn't know, rather than telling everybody in town it's safe to return it's safe to return. I guess how you leave town for a bit. You find out that you're told that you're able to come back in. Did you all come home immediately? What sort of information was given to you all at that point?
No information.
Something about that.
Yeah.
I compare this to 9/11. They were told just a couple days after that the air was safe, and before any true, real testing of homes, that we were told it was safe to come back. And Tammy emotionally really wanted to come back. I didn't want to come back right away. But when they lifted the evacuation, we came back shortly after. And as we were packing up, we were shocked, just like all the other townspeople, to hear the train started running through.
Yeah.
Before we even got home.
Yeah, we didn't come home until it was Thursday afternoon, I believe. We came home. Because we were closed that entire week at our office. I think maybe we opened Friday afternoon. I can't remember.
Yeah, we actually had on the voicemail at the office, the police, the municipal building is right next to us. If you've ever seen our office.
In Darlington?
Yes.
Okay, yep.
We got the big gold guy. I don't know if you saw that. But,
Okay.
the police told us not to open.
Yeah.
So that was the Tuesday, that week of, they told us, we actually came back on Friday. I opened back up on Friday. But,
They actually evacuated the girls. We have a staff that was in there on Monday working, and this police came over and said, "You need to leave now."
Right.
And that was early afternoon. It wasn't even close to the burn time yet. But
Yep. And unfortunately, I mean, so that's in Darlington, Pennsylvania. I've
Yeah.
spoken with quite a few residents over in Darlington, and police are coming in telling people that they need to leave. The amount of assistance, I mean, the assistance happening in East Palestine isn't sufficient in a lot of cases, in my opinion. But
No.
in Darlington, it's even worse. I mean, if you're over the state line in Pennsylvania, it seems like getting any sort of assistance from Norfolk Southern is much more difficult. I've spoke with a resident in the beginning of this trip who's trying to get her well water sampled. The state government in Pennsylvania is saying, "Oh, we're not worried about it in your area." Meanwhile, she's only a couple miles from the derailment site. You saw those clouds. I've seen those clouds in footage. I mean, it went more than a couple miles away.
we can't get our well water tested.
And you're in East Palestine still, in the town at least, right?
And it's very interesting because when we came back after the burn, I believe we were on Newsmax, a couple days later, it might have been Monday or Tuesday. And we talked about needing to get the water tested or something. And then the next day we had the police and Norfolk Southern at the door wanting to do the testing. But that's when they were having you sign all this paperwork.
They wanted me to sign something. And I said, "I'm not signing anything. If you want to test my water, go ahead."
Right.
And so they said, "Well, you think about it and you call us back." And so I called them back and they never came back. And then
I've tried numerous times. I've been at the EPA office and asked, and then I've gone to the Norfolk Southern, the church, and called. And I even had J.D. Vance, his office stepped in on our behalf, and they denied him.
So this is interesting too. You've probably seen a lot of this. She talks about J.D. Vance. I voted for J.D. Vance. When he was going to come into town, on his website it said, "Okay, I'm going to come into town and talk to residents and the press and the city and help." We saw that and we said, "Hey, how come there's no announcement?"
Right.
And then I and a lot of other people saw that, residents, and we called the municipal building early in the morning that day. None of us got a call back. The same thing with Governor DeWine when he comes into town. It's almost like they come in for a photo op and they don't want any residents there asking questions. Now, both times, both with Senator Vance and Governor DeWine.
Governor DeWine.
Yeah.
We just we're 2 minutes from town, so we ran down to town. We looked for news vans, and we crashed the party. So
Which
we
was
did
at
that.
the municipal building.
Yes,
Right.
we did. And
The J.D. Vance's.
Yeah, so he was at the municipal building, and
Correct.
he never told any residents that he was going to be there.
We were the only two.
Because it's almost like they want to answer the canned questions.
So
Right.
we got to ask like 6 questions and got a lot of attention. That's how he interacted on our behalf. He gave us his email to say, "Contact me, and then I'll step in for you." But
And yeah, I mean, we've experienced that as well, even like from the press side of things. The only interaction I've had with Governor DeWine wasn't because I was alerted of some press conference. There were 3 or 4 news teams that were alerted, 3 or 4 news teams that, frankly, the governor knew weren't going to ask him any hard questions. They were probably just going to stand there and point their camera, take the photo. That was the same day that Governor DeWine went and, took his sip of the water to prove that it was all good. The same thing happened when Pete Buttigieg was in town. That happened on my first trip here. It was like unannounced. He essentially showed up at like 7 o'clock in the morning, walked around on the train tracks down at the derailment site, did a press conference again that there was no release about it ahead of time to let people know that it was happening. It was exactly to your point. They want to answer the canned questions. And I mean, that shows that it's, I'm glad JD Vance was able to try to ask on your behalf. That's ridiculous that, that it didn't really get a response after that. But both sides of the aisle here, it's been 3 months. There's still supposedly some legislation in the works to maybe try to prevent something like this happening in the future again. But it's been pretty radio silent on that front for the last couple of weeks.
That's really not helping us now.
And it's not helping now. Exactly. That's another side of it, because there's 2 real things that, folks in politics can kind of do. Number one, they can try to make sure that real help comes to you all now. It's about 2.5 months too late, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't still be doing it. There's time to try to make people as whole as possible with this whole experience. And then the other side of it is, a lot of residents that I'm speaking with, I'm sure you all feel similarly. You don't want to see this happen to anybody else.
No.
So, how can we, what steps can be taken
to
make sure something doesn't happen again?
He confronted Governor DeWine at the press conference.
Well, I wanted to say.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that got the ball rolling for the creek.
That was nice when you also talked to Governor DeWine. So we kind of had the same experience with him. When I confronted him, he afterward there was a reporter from a local news station, Pittsburgh news station, and he came up and he said, this is just what he said. He said, "Hey, you're my kind of guy. I wish I could ask those questions." Can you believe that, first of all?
Right. I wish I could ask those questions. He's a journalist. You're supposed to ask those questions.
Right. Secondly, I said to him, I said, why, if I'm a resident, and I grew up since a little kid right to the next town adjacent, so I'm from here. Why was he talking to me that way with a simple, straightforward question? He is more angry with me than he would be at Norfolk Southern. And the same with you. Why would he be angry with you for asking
a
question that, my question is well, they were opening a health clinic, I'm sure you're aware of, okay? Most people don't trust it, and it's just, hey, I'm suffering from these symptoms. Well, it's probably allergies.
Right. Right. Oh, you're stressed out.
It was the ribbon cutting ceremony that day.
So the same thing there. It was like secret. I got a call from, there's a big business owner in Pittsburgh, and he said, "Hey, your governor's in town in about 10 minutes. I swore I wasn't going to do anything that day, just like today, which is my birthday, by the way."
Happy birthday. I found out just before I came over here. Happy birthday. And thank you for being willing to talk to us all. Yeah.
So I said, "Okay, what time?" He said, "Well, it was 10 to 10. I was still laying in bed." And he said, 10 o'clock. And I'm like, "Oh, crap." So I threw on a ball cap, a flannel, and I was down there in like 4 minutes, me and a buddy of mine. We were the only 2 residents there, and it was all press. And I basically asked him, I said, "Hey, this is a step in the right direction with a health clinic," which is not free, by the way.
Of course.
It's a good step in the right direction with a health clinic. So number one, it's frightening that we even need this, if you think about it. Secondly, what are you still doing about the one of the main reasons people are still getting sick, and it was our creeks. I turned to the press and I said, "Hey, I'll take any one of you right down and show you how contaminated this was over Easter weekend." The night before, about 9 hours before he gave this speech, the creeks were just horrible. And we can get into that later if you want, why they even got worse. But then he got angry with me, and because he came with Ann Vogel, but some reason she was away at the time looking in the clinic or something when I asked the question, and he couldn't find her, and I said, "Well, typical EPA." And then he got a little
and Ann Vogel's an EPA official, correct? Right.
And
Ann
runs
Vogel,
this area.
Okay.
With the Ohio, not
Ohio EPA.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
So that was it.
Yeah.
And so you had the same type of response from him.
Yeah, and it's outrageous because the when I bumped into him, it was similar. It was he was talking about the clinic when initially I think they were still located in the church at that point.
Yes.
And I said, hey, I spoke with residents in these 4 houses right on East Clark Street last night. They're dealing with complications breathing. They're dealing, the list of symptoms that we've all heard at this point. And he was directing them to that clinic where you couldn't get a diagnosis of any kind at that point. They weren't providing any like prescriptions or treatments of any kind. And most notably, and this is a big thing that's kind of coming to fruition now, is related to testing. And then after the testing, let's talk about the creeks. A big thing that's been happening, and we've been speaking with residents this last week. Chrissy Ferguson was one of the first ones who kind of pointed it out to me. We've been staying in touch even while I've been away. And folks trying to get these tests for vinyl chloride to see if they're still being exposed to it. It's a urine test. We've spoken to a handful of residents who have taken that test, who have gotten their results back, and unfortunately are testing positive. Many of them have been getting the prescription from you to be able to get these tests. The kind of major issue here, we got to check out a little bit of a briefing that was provided to Senator Sherrod Brown by his staff before a meeting with East Palestine residents that he had. And in that briefing, it had notes from the CDC that essentially pointed out why the CDC is, for whatever reason, recommending not to get these vinyl chloride tests. A couple of the points in there, and I'm kind of paraphrasing them a little bit, but one of the points was that the results are difficult to analyze. I'm sorry, but so are all of the EPA, air test results, water test results, all of that sort of stuff is difficult to analyze. It doesn't bother them there, but here it does. Concerns about, the exact accuracy of the tests. Again, same thing. It's been an issue with all of the water sampling, the air sampling. That's why we have major discrepancies between the independent water testing done by folks like Dr. Welton from Purdue University and the Ohio EPA. Obviously some accuracy issues there too. Doesn't stop them from doing the test then. But when it comes to actually testing these residents, and there's a couple other points they made as well, but when it comes to testing these residents for exposure to these chemicals, to me it feels like, the CDC is providing that recommendation because they're afraid to see what they're going to find. It's a little bit of speculation, but I can't think of another reason. Obviously, it's been difficult for folks to get these tests. Can you talk about from your experience and folks coming to you asking for help with this in making this all happen?
In the beginning, it was nearly impossible. In the beginning, let's say it was impossible. Now it's nearly impossible.
Right.
It's getting a little better, I think. So the experience is that, let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that I had the proper. When I first started writing the prescriptions, I just thought it was the right thing to do. And that's within my scope of practice. I run blood work on people pretty regularly. I write my own prescriptions just to check my health at the beginning of the year. So when I first started doing it, I got some people that were negative. And I said, this may be good, or it may be like the CDC is telling us that you only have a very short window anyway, and the window's gone. The chemical bomb is gone. So as I went on, I heard people being turned away from other doctors and maybe getting a wrong CPT code to go, and they were turned away from the lab. So just to make sure, I called Quest Laboratories and Quest Diagnostics. This was after I already started writing scripts. And I asked for one of their head doctors to call me back. And this is an interesting phone call because I was talking to him and I said, I just want to reaffirm that I have all the proper codes. And he said, yes, you do. And I said, it's probably a crapshoot anyway because, from what they're telling us, the bomb is gone and everybody's going to be negative anyway, even if they did incur some type of damage from the chemicals. And he said, well, that's true for the blood test. He said, that's not true for the urine test. He said the urine test shows up through chronic exposure. Let's say if it's in your home, if it's in your ducts, if it's in your environment, that's going to build up, and if you're coming in contact with it all the time, you're going to urinate or pee it out. And that changed the whole ball game for me because I stopped even testing for blood, and then I just started exclusively doing the urine test for vinyl chloride. And since then, I have had. There's been, for the few people that have tested, the ratio is quite high of people testing positive. And what I think is ridiculous, I think we both talked to Shelby Walker.
Yep.
Oh my God, what an insult. So they go in her backyard, which was full of toxins, and the chemical bomb went just 900 feet from her home.
Right,
and
the
they
track's
say,
literally in her backyard.
Yeah.
oh, fire pit, which you haven't used since the summer. You know, you sit around and do a little fire. That's probably why you have benzene in your blood. And so I want to make it known that I have smokers and non-smokers both testing negative, all right? And then I have smokers and non-smokers both testing positive for vinyl chloride. So the money we spend on total waste in this government, we should be tested. Those that want tested, the government, or put it on Norfolk Southern, make them pay.
Yep.
We should be tested every 3 months for this until they deem it, a safe period of time when nobody's testing positive anymore.
Right. I think that's important to note too. You mentioned you've got folks who are smokers and non-smokers testing both positive and negative for this, meaning there are folks, depending on, maybe it's where you live in town, maybe it's where you work in town, maybe it's the proximity to your home to some of these creeks or to the derailment site. And that's something, they're testing positive and negative. That, is getting to the point, the more and more folks that we're going to see start to take these tests, the more and more definitive this will start to look. I've also spoken with an expert who's provided me with a lot of consulting on covering all of this story. He's a PhD chemist. He's got a degree in toxicology. And he's saying the same things. He's saying, the test, he's like, it's not a perfect test. However, the more people that we're seeing, and I've been sending him a lot of these results from folks who are sharing them with me, he was saying every additional one you send me, you're going to have to twist yourself into a scientific pretzel to say that this is not from the derailment. The more people that are testing, the more clear it is that it is from the results of this. It's not from something else. Someone, you'd have to smoke 1 million cigarettes essentially to make to make this test, in that direction. So it's again important to know that it's folks who smoke and don't smoke who have tested positive for this.
I've got a young high school athlete who tested positive for vinyl chloride. Makes me want to tear up, but all right. So yeah, it's what is the downside of pricking somebody's arm and paying,
or a urine test, right?
Yeah, right. Or a urine test. What's the downside of that?
And just to go on the human emotion side of this whole thing, there are people in town that feel their lives are threatened. Now that they're testing positive for vinyl chloride, it's like amplifies that. And they want to get out and they want to move. And a lot of people don't have the means to do that.
Right.
We're actively considering moving away from here. It's just something that you don't want to do when you're getting very close to retirement age. But we have our retirement savings that we can use. Don't want to. But these people in town that don't have that, they should be given that opportunity to move out if they can. So my husband and I started a fundraiser. It's 3 months after the derailment. It's not a sexy topic anymore because, the press is gone except for good folks like yourself. So we've started a Give, Send, Go, and we've also started a GoFundMe at East Palestine Off the Rails, and we want to provide that opportunity to give money to people that want a large chunk of money. I believe we're doing, if we can, $10,000 a family to move them out, or they can choose to move to a new home, or they can find a new apartment, and just
help them at least get started.
First, last, and
security
deposit, all of that, and some furniture, things like that. So if anyone that wants to help folks in town, please visit our GoFundMe at East Palestine Off the Rails, or if you're not comfortable with GoFundMe, Give, Send, Go at East Palestine Off the Rails. We would greatly appreciate it because we really, really want to help the people here.
And I'll make sure that we provide links to that for folks in the description too, so that folks can access it easily.
Yes, the town. I mean, we've been treated very well in town, and with our business and the community. So we want to be able to give back what we can.
And I'll say too, I've spoken with, I don't even know how many people at this point over my past couple trips, but folks in town speak very highly of both of you, and I for folks watching, I know that money will go to good use and get to the right folks.
Some not, since I was poking in the creek. I don't know why you wouldn't want to know if there's chemicals in your creek, but some people are mad at me.
Yeah, well, and that's an unfortunate situation with this whole thing, that there are factions of town being slowly divided over a lot of this, which is part of the plan, unfortunately.
Yes.
Is what it seems like.
I'll give you a scoop that I don't think, since she's talking about this, that it angers me. I don't think this, well, I've told it just the other day in a video, but I don't have the viewership like you do. Since you've been here, are you aware of the butcher shop that or no, Doyles Meats?
I'm aware of it. I don't know any specific stories regarding it, but I'm aware of it. Yeah.
All right, just take a minute here. It kind of exemplifies what is so wrong with what happened here after, about taking care of people. So Doyles Meats has been here for 17 years, and it's a butcher shop. And a lot of my patients, a lot of people from out of this area used to go there because they loved the meat. He, unfortunately, from what I understand, may have had some health problems, and he was getting ready to retire. And my friend was going to buy that butcher shop. So they had a deal worked out. My friend got the financing from the bank, and that was just before all this happened. And then the chemical bomb went off. And so my friend went into the Doyles Meats after, and the deal wasn't 100% through yet. He didn't sign. And he said, "What is that smell?" And what it was, I don't know. You probably have told people that our town is built over some tunnels where the creeks run through.
Right.
And what it ended up being, that whole plaza, there is a tunnel that the creek runs through.
Right.
And that concrete is decades old and it has cracks in it. And they said, well, that's the chemicals coming up through the creek into the store. I said, deal's off. So not only was, let's say he didn't have that smell.
Right.
There's so much uncertainty with a business now, are people going to want to come buy exposed meat to the air? And
right.
So that was the icing on the cake. Well, Norfolk Southern approached him. They said, you pick a place in town. We will set you up in your butcher shop. I respect this guy so much because he said no. And maybe it wasn't all altruistic. Maybe he just was afraid to open a store here now.
Right.
But that made me so angry because Norfolk Southern would set him up in a new butcher shop in a new location.
Right.
But somebody 900 feet from the tracks with toxic waste in their yard just has to beg to get anything done. And they could spend that money that went to that business. My friend, this was his opinion, that they wanted to have the illusion that businesses weren't failing and everything was just perfect here. Why couldn't they just spend that money on a person that needs to get out of here?
Right.
Yep.
So,
and that seems to be happening quite a bit. I've spoken with a handful of folks. I think Jamie Wallace was one of the first people who kind of clued me in on this new community liaison person who is essentially paying out. They've got money, they're divvying out, and a lot of it is similar things is going to businesses. They're trying to kind of get businesses, and it's not all of them, it's businesses who seemingly, and if this is from like multiple people now, so I'm kind of putting the pieces together, who fit into this one little clique of people who are just like, let's be back to normal. Let's just pretend this is, we're all good.
People, I don't disagree with that, and I don't think Tammy disagrees with that. I think the businesses should get more than they're even getting. But on top of that, the residents, the silent people that don't have a voice.
Agreed. And again, these aren't like some huge corporations that are being given some of this money. These are small businesses that are people's livelihoods in the most for the most part here. And they absolutely deserve to be made whole in this. In my opinion, they should have almost done something, and it would have cost nothing in comparison to what we did for businesses and whatnot during COVID. Imagine a small-scale version of that in East Palestine. This is a town of 4,500 or so people. The amount of money we're talking about is it's negligible for Norfolk Southern, or even, I think Norfolk Southern should be paying for this, but even if in the meantime, the U.S. government does it for the meantime and then gets the money back from Norfolk Southern later, so that good folks in East Palestine don't need to beg Norfolk Southern for the money. Norfolk Southern shouldn't even be part of the question anymore. The government should be in here making sure that all these businesses are made home, a miniature PPP program or whatever you want to do, similar to COVID. That hasn't even been close to a discussion for the most part. Can
I say two things?
I was going to say about the 401k too.
Two things. Number one, we're hardworking people, all of us. Most people in town. It's actually demeaning. It feels demeaning to go to go in there and ask for money, for these people.
Oh.
Secondly, COVID.
I had an experience.
Test. COVID test, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Why is it different here?
Yeah, now the CDC is saying don't
Yeah.
test. Don't test. It makes no sense.
Yeah, the church. I had a experience at the church, right? And I left crying, and because I was trying to get something, and I overheard a worker that didn't see me around the corner saying, These people in town are just trying to get what they can. They're just trying to abuse the system, and I mean, I've only been to the church to get my $1,000 for each of us, and that was it. And I was going ask for something else about asking about duct cleaning, and I just could not believe that someone's talking to someone else. Where is that coming from? Who is telling this worker that information?
Right.
And of course, the person did say that there are some people that are legitimately needing it and that are hurting. But when I heard the word abuse, I said, "Do you want to talk about abuse? You came in and raped this community. That is about the worst abuse you can possibly do to someone." And that's what happened here.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I've talked with dozens of people on this, and like they don't want to go ask for this money.
No.
Unfortunately, a lot of these people need to.
Yeah.
If you look at the 2020 census, the median income for an individual in East Palestine is roughly $28,000 a year. Folks don't have the money to just pick up and stay in a hotel for a while. Folks don't have the money to hire a professional cleaning service because the railroad wouldn't hire a real cleaning service to come in and clean their homes for them. They don't have the money to just pick up and leave. So many folks are stuck in this impossible situation where I stay home, I continue to get sick or risk getting sick, I risk having my children get sick, or if I do pick up and leave, if they're fortunate enough to own their home, they're not going to be able to sell it, or they're going to be able to sell it for less than what it was worth. I spoke with someone the other day. He bought his house in East Palestine 9 months ago. It's worth something like $12,000 less today, and that's just based on like the real estate website. In reality, it's probably worth even less than that, because who's going to buy a home in East Palestine a block away from the tracks at this point?
Right.
I
think that I've heard that some people are trying to buy homes, but they're trying to get in on the action of maybe they are the people coming for money. I don't know, but whatever the situation is, we shouldn't lose our home value. I'm afraid to even look to see what happened to ours.
And it's horrific that in 2023, the United States of America, this is even a question.
Yeah.
We're happy to spend the money on other things with barely any debate over it. The Silicon Valley Bank fails. Less than 48 hours, all of the money is provided. We need to send another $1 billion to Ukraine immediately. It just happens, bipartisan, no questions asked for the most part. And you can say that either of those causes might need the money, right? And that's fine. But when it comes to something happening in our own country to a community that could really use the help right now, you hear nothing.
I think that's not unique. I think I hear more and more stories of other places, because people come onto our Facebook page, which is the same as our GoFundMe, East Palestine Off the Rails, if anybody wants to join. And they talk about this similar situation being ignored by the government.
And that's what gives us no hope.
Right.
When you see these communities that 30 years later, they're still fighting.
9 years in Flint.
Right. Jordan, my colleague Jordan was just in Flint last week covering the 9-year anniversary of that. It's ridiculous.
It is.
Let's get onto the creeks a little bit, because I know you've done quite a bit of digging around in the creeks and seeing.
Literally.
We've got some of your YouTube videos. Maybe we'll provide a link for folks if they want to check that out as well. If you want to give us a little bit of an update on the creeks, what you've been up to down there for folks who haven't seen some of your videos. I
think there's a few important stories here. Number one has to do with the different factions in town. Unfortunately, what has happened. Initially, I think you said maybe a week or so, they started calling. I don't even know where they heard of us, but the national news was calling us and doing interviews. And at that time, Tammy had like a raspy irritation in the throat. And Greg Kelly on Newsmax said, "Hey, well, how do you feel, Rick?" And I said, "Well, I feel the same as after the accident. I don't really feel anything." And a day or two later, I said, "Hey, they're saying everything looks good. Let me go check this out." So if you go the back way down my house and it heads right down into Negley, I'm there in less than probably 3 minutes or so. And the creek is right there, Leslie Run. And this is the only time I'll swear on this because I'm going to give you the real reaction. So I went in there with my boots and my gloves, had no respirator on at the time. Let me talk about that for just a second. I lost my smell. I always had a keen sense of smell, very keen. Lost that to another man-made disaster, but with COVID. When I started overturning rocks and just walking in the creek, my reaction was, we are fucked. You saw the chemicals.
Yeah.
So since then, I was in there once or twice a week filming. Now, the first important thing is you can hear me in the initial video like a fool. I'm turning over the rocks and go, I wonder if I can smell this. I'm going, you can hear me sniffing. That first night, I woke up at 5 a.m. I was having a nightmare. And the reason I was having a nightmare, my joints hurt so bad. My every joint in my body, and I don't hurt. I don't feel my body. Patients come in, I have back pain. I said, I don't feel my body. I was in severe pain. Had to run to the bathroom. I had 5 straight weeks of just explosive diarrhea, 10 times a day probably. I had to leave treating patients, go to the bathroom. I never had a proper bowel movement in 5 weeks. That night, I felt like strep throat times 3. My nasal cavity, if you think, all I can think of like a stripe down a skunk. I had a stripe right down the middle of my throat that burned, that went into my nasal cavity. I also came up with, I've never had acid reflux. Now, I know people talk about heartburn and when they eat, they get it. For 4 straight days, 24 hours a day, I had almost like you would call like a mist spray bottle of acids shooting into my throat. It burnt my tongue. It burnt the whole inside of my mouth. Anybody that knows me is I don't touch any medication, no drugs of any kind. I had my staff run out because I couldn't take it anymore at work. In fact, in some of the interviews, you can hear me on the national news. I'm trying to clear my throat. And so they had to get me Pepsid and Tums, and I lived on that for a bit. And then it kind of subsided. I said, I got to stay out of the creeks. So so this was a day where I then, not shortly after, there was an event at the winery, which is unfortunately now closed. Well, and then there was also a
hee-haw event.
Yeah, a hee-haw event at
the Eagles.
So I said I'd go film. Interestingly enough, that night the wind was blowing so hard, and it's right down by the tracks. So that's me filming in the creeks, continuing like a fool to film in the creeks without a respirator initially, going to those events. And so I'm taking a shower. And I'm rinsing. I'm like, what is that? And my wife sent you pictures.
And we'll show them to folks if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's why I sent them. In my 59 years, I have never had anything wrong with my skin. Nothing. There was a welt the size of, you'd say, like a teacup saucer. And I said, wow, I mean, this is way too early for any kind of cancer or anything like that. I said, this is probably like a histamine reaction to chemicals. So you'll see the welt. And
the tentacle.
It almost has like tendrils coming off of it. And you can see I was not struck. I was not hit. I was not. This was some type of chemical reaction along with the other things that I was suffering from. Now, as I would stay away from the creeks, and then I got a military. I also actually have a military mask now that will filter out mustard gas and things like that. When I go to the creek, I don't have those symptoms anymore. One thing happened to me too. You can see in one of the videos, I was walking through the rapids. I now wear chest waders. As I'm walking up, it got really strong rapids, and then my boots filled with water. So I'm not quite sure if that did it too. Maybe my skin soaked it in.
Right.
But the creeks, I kept saying I would stay out of the creeks. But every time the EPA or Norfolk Southern would say, everything's great here, it would drag me back in. There was a point, and I think I saw one of your videos, you said, well, it's not as bad as it looked, right? When they started, and it was horrible at first, it started to taper off. We saw
when it was horrible too. I mean, in the beginning it was really bad, and then, on the last trip, we could still see some, but not as much, but it's, my guess is it's very location by location. So
it does, but what happened was, it got just as bad when they started digging up the creeks for a few weeks. I estimate thousands of gallons of a white paint substance coming down the creek, which I have films of.
That was Easter Saturday.
Yeah,
It was like they turned on a faucet. The creek was calm, and then all of a sudden he's like, "What the heck's going on?" And you could see it was like water whooshing down with the white stuff, right?
Yeah, and it was horrible then. So.
Yeah.
Between the time where it was very horrible initially after the derailment, and then when they started digging up the tracks, it was horrible again. It started to taper off a bit. But the interesting thing is they've done no real cleaning in Leslie Run. They say they put up the signs,
Right.
but those chemicals are going somewhere.
Right.
I know they're going in the bank. I know they're going in the soil, and I know they're going downstream. Where are those chemicals going?
Yeah, and I mean, I had a conversation with Aaron Bragg earlier in the week. He shared with me some information from, I'm forgetting the exact acronym, but it was like an Ohio Sanitation Commission or something, who actually has water sample, it's like live water samples they're constantly testing as far down as the Ohio River. And they're actually still, as of mid-April, finding some of these chemicals of concern in the Ohio River. Butyl acrylate was one of them, a couple others actually showing signs of them in the Ohio River. So that was something that Aaron was looking into. I believe he was speaking with Dr. Welton from Purdue University a bit about that as well.
I'm going to guess it was because of the second release that's just my guess, when they dug up the tracks so abruptly, and all that white chemical. I believe that was butyl acrylate coming down through the creek at that time.
But after you did the press conference with Governor, well, you didn't do it. You went to the press conference. That was the weekend right before the grand opening. That was Easter Monday, I believe, right? And the creeks were horrible. And then you went down and told them, about the creeks being bad. And then wasn't it shortly thereafter that Deborah Shore came out and said, yes, the creeks are still highly contaminated. But before that, they were saying everything was fine. Right. And now they're fine again because they said the water's clear as of April 5th, but you have a video of April 29th.
Right.
And
the samples that Aaron Bragg showed me were from after April 5th as well, and that was as far down as the Ohio River too.
But I believe that the tester that from Pittsburgh, the Pine, I forgot the name of his. You
so Big Pine Consultants. I spoke with him. You've heard of that company?
I've seen a local news story with him in it. Yep.
Recently or before?
I feel like in the last week or two.
Okay, initially he came down and he found a lot of contaminants. Okay, and I spoke with him and he was so nice to call me back. And I did the same thing yesterday because local Pittsburgh news station gave kind of a flowery report. Right. And listen, we want things to be good here.
Right.
But he said, well, I didn't find the contaminants that I saw in the water previous, and it all came back good, and they were detecting at lower levels in Sulphur Run. So I called him, and I had some questions. I thought he was going to answer them the way I asked, and he actually did. I asked Justin, he's a CEO of Big Pine Consultants. That's a water testing company. I said, did you do any sediment samples? And he said, no, we did a water dip test the water's coming down. If the news crews look at the water, they say, wow, everything's great. But if they would walk through the water or poke, they would see the chemicals come up.
Yeah.
And he said, no, we did a water dip test. He said, if we did the sediment sample, we would probably get something, but they don't do that type of testing. And he also said, and we did Sulphur Run because I think if we did Leslie Run, it's still highly contaminated. And I think it would, and he told it would come positive. He did tell, and that's to my recollection what he said. I believe that's what he said in our conversation. That was just last night. And he did say in this report, even though the water's fine, he said exactly what I said. He said, where did these chemicals go? He said, are they in your vegetation? Are they in the banks? Are they in the soil? Nobody knows where they went.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And that's the terrifying thing about living here. You can't see the monster. You don't know the strength of the monster. And that's, how are you supposed to live in fear every day of your life? It's not right.
No, it's absolutely not right. Again, it's been 3 months. We've still got contaminated creeks. We still have folks stuck in town in some cases who can't leave. If they are able to leave, it's for periods of time, and they're bouncing around from hotel to hotel. with their whole families, their pets in many cases. Again, I've said this a couple of times. I was really hoping, I'm not naive to think that it was going to be getting better at this point, or that somebody was going to be paying attention and listening, but the situation hasn't really improved all that much here in East Palestine 3 months later. We'll see where this goes. We're going to continue to stay on this. This is our 3rd trip back here. There will be a 4th trip. I don't know exactly when that'll be, but we'll be continuing to stay in touch with folks like you. Unless there's anything else you wanna jump into that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about, I'll give you the opportunity if you want to.
We talked about the fundraiser, so we appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. And I would just say too, those of us that are, for example, when I go in the creeks, they're still highly contaminated. We're not trying to cause trouble.
Right.
And in fact, it's a shame we even have to say that. You would think people would want to know if their creeks are contaminated. Yeah. But there is a lot of people that don't either really care, or they just want to get beyond that. And there is the part of the philosophy that, well, if you expose what's still in our creeks, people don't want to come here, like business, shop from our, and I understand that. But a lot of us are on wells, independent wells. We're not hooked into the muni water, and we don't know how much went in the soil, and the EPA doesn't either. It's just a guess, because nobody really knows, and that's been our big fear. We're not trying to cause trouble in the town, and again, I just want to monitor the creeks, see what is going on, and for the health of everybody here.
Yeah, because it feels like we're living on borrowed time. We don't know if, but it's probably when is it going to hit the well system.
Let me end with this, at least this. I don't know if where you're from, you have a basement or no, or you're aware of basements.
Yeah, Where I grew up, I've had a basement. I've even had basements that flood too.
Exactly.
Yep.
So you see it rain, and if your basement has problems with flooding, within a few hours you're going to have water in your basement. And a basement is 8 to 10 feet deep. And I would say the best laid plans of mice and men. We get all these scientists telling us everything, and 9 times out of 10 they're wrong. If that travels 10 feet in a few hours, how quickly is it going to take those chemicals to get to our wells? If they're going to get there, I don't believe it's going to take years. That's my opinion. And it's got to the point where we personally don't feel safe here. So we're looking to move. Unfortunately, we've got the shooting range out back. We've got this just like we want. And unfortunately, we're
all of our stuff
looking to move.
Right.
So you might be, if you come back and interview us, we might be in a different location. I don't know.
Yeah. I really appreciate you all taking the time. Again, for folks too, we'll make sure the links for donations for folks in town will be down below. Again, these folks are highly esteemed. Lots of folks I'm talking with are saying that these are great people over here. So I know that this money is going to go to the right folks who really need it. So if you're able to, please consider doing so.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it, especially on your birthday. Happy birthday. Yeah. Thank you guys.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
It's really good.